Where? Where is this child born King of the Jews? Those are my first words. In fact, in your holy book, those were the first human words written in that book of Matthew. Where is this king? Where is this child that was born King of the Jews? I asked because I wanted to know. Guided by this star in the east, that's where I've come from. So brilliant, so according to prophecy. I couldn't help but to follow. I couldn't help but to assume that an event of this nature would occur in a kingly place, the city of David. So I went to Jerusalem, and I talked to the king himself, Herod. Where is this child born King of the Jews? That's what I asked. Those were my first words. But you know what? Those were his first words too. My intention was to find this king and to worship him. But something gave me the impression that his intentions weren't all that right. He said, go and find this king, because I want to worship him too. So we came to Jerusalem thinking that the king would be born in a city of a king. But he wasn't there, and so my friends and I were very perplexed. Where could it be then? And it was then that me and my friends learned that it was not in the kingly city in Jerusalem, but in another place that David was known for as well. In Bethlehem. I couldn't believe it. But as I thought about it, I put two and two together. As I reasoned in my logic, according to what we've studied in the sky and the prophecies from Malachi years before, and even Isaiah, 500 years prior, this star shone in the sky, the most brilliant star you've ever seen. And it shined over this small town, this obscure town of obscure people. I didn't know. See, my friends and I weren't of Jewish tradition. We weren't familiar with their customs, weren't of Jewish descent. In fact, we were Persians. I hail from Persia. It was a long journey. Your book calls us Magi, and that we were. There's many names you can associate to Magi, but we're more astronomers than anything. Some say we were sorcerers. Some say that we were wise. I like to think that I am. We study a lot. We follow prophecy. And when we came across this Jewish text, that a new shepherd, a king, would be born to guide Israel. And we did the math and saw the star. We couldn't help but to follow. We couldn't help it. And so we traversed that long journey from Persia, unfamiliar of Jewish customs, Gentile as can be. We were the furthest away from any kind of Jewish tradition, anybody born of Jewish descent. We weren't part of their customs. We didn't obey their laws. But nonetheless, we saw this in the sky through prophecy and our own calculations, knew that something special occurred. The radiant beam of that star was the brightest we'd ever seen, and it had shone for a long time. I find it peculiar, though, that nobody else was searching for this king. And us, who were the furthest away from any kind of Jewish custom, we came and decided to pursue this star because it shone and magnified something significant. It had to have been. Malachi and Isaiah wouldn't have prophesied so. Oh, Judah, before you a king will come that will shepherd all of Israel. We wanted to come and pay homage. Our intentions were good, I assure you. We weren't necessarily kingly people, but we did do a lot of homework. And this king, though, Herod, also wanted to join. Go and find this child if you find him on this road. Let me know so that I can go down and worship him too. You know, there are people that worship their gods righteously on the exterior. But they have selfish intentions underneath. A show of religion, but with malice in their hearts. I'm sure Herod knew of this child, this king born of the Jews, but it made him fearful, because he had so much going on, so much available to him. He was the king. He had built his palace on this great hill called the Herodian. It stretched to the heavens. And so a king who was magnified by his popularity, his status, and his privilege built a place above all of the people. But little did he know, as this king tried to ascend to the heavens, another king in obscurity and poverty came down. And we, Gentiles as could be, found ourselves in a place where all social barriers, cultures that have dividing lines between people, were beginning to deconstruct and crumble. There is a difference. There's a difference, a vast difference between knowing about somebody or even studying something from afar and actually knowing. You see, we saw this star for a long time. But with me and my friends, according to our calculations and our observations of this star, it wasn't enough for us to simply study. It wasn't enough for us to simply know about. But because this made something significant, because it meant so much, the stars were literally aligning. The prophecy was coming to fruition. We as Persians don't ascribe to the Torah, the holy book, but we were able to find those prophetic words and see that what those prophets were saying was coming to fruition. So yes, there is a vast difference between knowing about somebody and seeing it occur in other people's lives. But we saw this star, and it wasn't enough for us to sit from a distance and study the star or to know about this king. We had to make a decision to follow that star, to follow this leader that was now born. But you know, it was risky, see? It was risky business to follow that, to go through the difficulty of knowing that king personally, to visiting that place where he was born and worshiping him. I was asked so many questions on my way here about people wondering, knowing that I was of Persian descent, asking questions, what business do you have with this king? What business do you have here in Judea? I come to observe what your prophecies fulfill, don't you know? Why are you coming? Well, I want to worship this king. I want to pay him homage. But nobody understood. Everybody knew about or maybe knew of, but nobody chose to follow. Herod chose, but he had different intentions. I could sense that in our conversation. But nonetheless, we did not simply admire that star from afar and study it, although we could have. It was too great. We had to follow. In our minds, through what was written by the early prophets, in the unavoidable deep sense that something was occurring in history that was significant, a sense that we felt inside of this star of this magnitude that shone like never before, had to have represented the presence of one who was like no other. A king, a leader whose reign would change the world as we knew it, even though we didn't exactly know how. We didn't know what, and we just didn't necessarily know how, but we knew where and we knew who. I don't have it all together, but I had enough to know or to want to know, and I desired to follow that leader. But there were implications to journeys like this, see? It was a long trek from Persia. It was an arduous journey. It was a long, uncomfortable journey to walk. And I learned of a young couple who traveled quite a considerable distance under much more strenuous implications and ramifications, but it was a long journey. as a man of means, as a man of intelligence, as a man who lives in comfort. That was an uncomfortable journey. It was fatiguing. It was out the provisions of home, and we were in a foreign land. Not knowing exactly where to go, but to follow that star. So there was some sacrifice in following this leader, even as a Persian. And yes, there were too, not only sacrifices, but there were also roadblocks. As I said, we went into Jerusalem thinking the king would be there. But no, I met another king who also wanted to know about this king that we were searching out. This king of Herod, his selfish intentions cloaked in religion. This king was supposed to have used his popularity and his power and his prestige and wealth to reach people. But we find out as the powers to be, as they were in that day, Herod, this great man, used people to achieve his wealth and popularity and power and status, even at the risk of his own family. And we were presented with a dream on our way that this wasn't right. It was a long journey. And there were sacrifices. There were roadblocks to following this leader. Nonetheless, we had to go. You may not be from the East. You may not be a magi. You may not study constellations or study prophecy. You may not ride a camel ever in your life. But the thing that's in common between me and you, cultures intersect and time stands still when we understand in so many ways that my journey is yours. If you choose to follow this leader and you choose to go on that journey, rather than to know about the Christ, rather than to study Christ from afar, have you taken that journey? There is a similarity between you and I. Culturally, no. But we all converge on this idea that we all, regardless of who we are and where we are interested in truth. And we want to pursue truth. We want to understand that there's an ultimate purpose for life. And one thing else that we share as well, aware or unaware, there is a star that guides our lives. Now the real question begs, what is that star? Or who is that star that guides our lives? Perhaps it is a star like Herod. Perhaps it is a star of wealth and prestige and prosperity. Perhaps we're tempted to follow that star that guides our lives. And this star dictates a life to accumulate the most. Whoever dies with the most toys wins, they say. When quantities of things have a premium over those things that add an invaluable quality to our life. Is it the star of wealth or prosperity? Herod had to ask himself that question. Maybe it's the star of popularity. I know that's a star that typically guides our lives. The star of popularity sometimes forms a life so hungry for prestige and position that one will do just about anything to get it. And some people are so intoxicated by the idea of having influence that they place themselves in a position to abandon their own human dignity and is willing to be influenced to the point where everybody likes them with the exception of them liking them. Oh, the star of popularity and prestige is a tricky star. Or perhaps it is the star of comfort. In these times especially, the star of comfort, that guiding light that we follow. No desire to risk, no desire to grow, no desire to ask questions, no desire to know, no desire to desire. For some, the pursuit of comfort could cause one to check out of life completely. You see, the people in that time in Jerusalem were so comfortable with their possessions and their wealth and their prestige, particularly Herod, that when we announced news that there was a king, that a new king would be born, and he was born very close, he became frightened. To not let go of that power, not to let go of that comfort of wealth and prosperity. But it is that star of comfort that so guides our lives. Turning our eyes and ears away from things and events of the world that would make us uncomfortable. And so it's not surprising to see when comfort turns into complacence, and complacence turns into indifference. That I'm so enamored by this star of comfort that I'll turn my eyes away from anything that makes me uncomfortable. And so I'll keep myself from making that journey. I too am a man of means. I too am a man who lived among comfort and power and prestige. But I couldn't help when the dots connected and the prophecy said and that star shone to abandon that, to risk a long journey. Not simply to study from afar or to simply know about this person, but I had to follow. I had to see face to face this king. Now, it's worth clarifying. It's worth clarifying that the star of wealth and prosperity, or the star of popularity or comfort, aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. It's not unreasonable to assume that the likes of a magi like myself would enjoy all of those things. Yet in spite, we were led to pursue a light of truth that pointed to something greater, something significant, something more that gave ultimate purpose to all those other pursuits in our lives. And so we are on our way on this journey to present a gift, an offering, to pay homage to this king, because we know that something significant has occurred. But not only do I plan to give the best of what I have, traditionally, you know, it is our custom as Persians to give the gifts of our land. We bring gold to symbolize kingship. We bring frankincense to understand that this child and his king and his reign will be anointed, and frankincense used to embalm, and myrrh to symbolize deity. All of these three gifts combined, I think, teaches us something about this child. But other than the gifts that we offer, we planned to worship him first, to give of ourselves, our whole persons, to pay homage, and also to give the best of what we have, the best that our culture would provide. And so I ask, what star or leader will you choose to follow? There are many stars and there are many leaders, young and old alike. Which stars of your lives do you give precedence to? Is it the star of wealth or prosperity? Is it the star of prestige? Is it the star of comfort? And once you've chosen who that leader is, once you've chosen that star, how will you follow? Whom will you follow? And if you do follow, does your life bear evidence? Are your feet dusty from a journey? Are your hands hardened by hours of work and preparation? Do our lives bear evidence? Do the work of our hands and our feet, do the words of our mouths point to the reality that we've made a choice to go beyond simply knowing about this Christ child, this King, or to see God working in other people's lives, but to make a decision to follow that leader? Even if it meant the peril of persecution. Even if it meant you not being so popular. Even if it meant you not being so wealthy. Even if it meant you not being so uncomfortable. Even if it costs something. We also come bearing gifts, as I said. We didn't bring the most, but we bring the best that we had to offer. Didn't bring the most, but the best that our culture had to offer. They were products of our own country. And I think that it should teach us that what God favors with us, we should honor Him with. Are we willing to offer Him our best gifts? Not in terms of quantity, but of quality. Most importantly, from one magi to a group of people who are wise in and of themselves, who also have a holy word that they follow. Are you willing to give yourselves in worship? As a figure who traditionally represents status and wealth and popularity and prestige, intelligence, let this magi remind ones within a culture so preoccupied with achieving those same things, that status, that prestige and intelligence and wealth aren't always guarantees of peace. Perhaps comfort, but not peace. If that were the case, magi like myself wouldn't be moved to risk all of that in pursuit of a truth and greatness that goes beyond anything the world would offer. There are plenty of things that can temporarily pacify us, but they pale in comparison to the everlasting assurance and the peace that comes from the one who is characterized as the Prince of it. And so I ask, as a magi who has stepped out of time, which star will you follow? And will you follow even though it might risk peril, even though it might make you unpopular, even though it might cause you to give up comforts that we're so used to enjoying? Will you follow that leader? And I was given such a blessing to know in my preparations to bow in front of this child that even though I was not Jewish, even though I didn't hold their traditions or their customs, even though I didn't have it all together with respect to who this person was, I knew he was significant, and in my worship, I was accepted. I was appreciated. And so all race, all cultural boundaries disintegrate when we decide to bow and give our lives to this king to pay homage. Which star will you follow? What gifts will you bring? Are you prepared to worship with your entire selves? I offer this star of peace, the hope of Christ, the hope of a king that not only rescued Israel, but all peoples. It's my hope that you find that peace, and it's my hope, rather than to stand from afar on the sidelines, that you might make the decision to follow that leader and the one whom we've called and know to be the Prince of Peace. Where the captives of Israel were led to the promised land by a pillar of fire, that light. We too were led by the brilliant star coming from the promise of a seed that would rescue us. Follow that leader. Follow that star. In Jesus' name, amen.